Well, let's go back first to how is it possible to decentralize a ledger? The old system was that a central party, let's say the bank in the case of a bank ledger, was the owner of that data, and that meant they could do anything, but other people were not allowed to tamper with it. If we want to make it so that even the owner or the originator of the data, such as the bank, is unable to tamper with it, the obvious answer is some kind of consensus-based model where different actors in the network have to agree to allow a transaction to go through. Well, if it's based on consensus, and that means that a majority of the different participants in the network could vote to overrule everybody else. If you think like Goldman Sachs, you just say, hey, let's buy more computers than anybody else, and we'll just be bigger in terms of how many network participants we are. We're going to create, 200,000 Bitcoin mining players that appear to exist on the network when really it's just one guy who's behind it. That's known in the computer security world as a Sybil attack, where you pretend to be thousands of different people in order to gain voting advantage in a consensus system. There has to be some way to thwart Sybil attacks to prevent them from taking over the network. Proof of work was originally invented as a deterrent for spam email. And the idea was to say, let me do some really complex math problem which is going to consume a huge amount of computing resources on my side. I'm basically proving to you as the recipient of the email, I not only sent you this email, which a spammer might have been sending to 1 million people, but I went through a whole very expensive process to calculate the answer to this math problem to prove to you that I really, really wanted to send you this email. I can't afford to do that math problem over 1 million times to send it to 1 million people. So you can trust that this email really is a one-to-one that's from me to you and not just junk mail that's being sent by a spammer. That's what proof of work was invented for. It's basically going through a very time-consuming and compute-intensive operation in order, essentially, when you think about it, to basically prove that you're willing to waste a whole bunch of electricity and computing resources. And it's really just to make it impossible for anybody to be able to afford enough computers to launch a Sybil attack against the rest of the network. Now, in blockchain, the way that transactions are validated is they have these kind of volunteer guys in the network that sign up to say, I'm willing to look at the transactions that are being processed through this system, make sure by checking the ledger that they're not double spending the same Bitcoin over again. And in exchange for doing that, I'm going to get paid in Bitcoin for helping to secure the network. That process is called mining. What the miners have to do is compete with one another in order to put the next block into the blockchain. And the way they compete is essentially to say, through this proof of work algorithm, who is able to waste the most electricity and the most computing resources in the shortest amount of time to solve this complicated math problem to prove that they're not just one of thousands and thousands of guys that one person has put on the network, but that they're actually putting all of their computing resources behind this. It's really important for people to understand the high complexity, the high compute power that's required for miners is not because there's some super duper secure encryption algorithm that makes Bitcoin safer. The process of encrypting the blockchain and making sure that all the transactions are legitimate and that no Bitcoins have been double spent, it really doesn't consume very much energy at all. What consumes a huge amount of energy is this arbitrary math problem that says, I am proving to the network that I've basically dedicated all the computers I can find to solving this arbitrary problem, trying to beat everyone else. Now, that works fine in a proof of concept. If you're in a laboratory, you got 5 guys demonstrating this idea, it's no problem. When you try to scale that to a global payment system, you end up literally consuming more energy than entire countries use, with everybody competing to put the next block on the blockchain. And blockchain's actually designed that the complexity of this arbitrary math problem gets harder. If more blocks are being put on the blockchain too quickly, they make the problem harder until it slows the network down. So this whole idea of proof of work is slowing the network down with arbitrary work that doesn't need to be done for any reason other than to deter against Sybil attacks. Well, the obvious question is, surely there must be a better way to guard against Sybil attacks, to prevent bad guys from faking out the network and pretending to be a majority of the network participants when they're really just one bad guy.
All right, Turr, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on a response to that.
Yeah, that was so eloquent and well put, Erik. I always try to, do the steelman strategy where you find the best argument of the other side. And I feel like you nailed it. Like, it was a great presentation of the, let's say, proof of work skeptical argument. There's a lot I agree with in how you technically explained the concept. So I'm not going to go over that. It's true that, you prevent Sybil attacks by requiring work to be done. There's two words in particular that jumped out for me, and that is waste and arbitrary. So calling the proof of work mechanism wasteful depends on your perspective, right? If you look at where proof of work is used, and I want to stress that, like, proof of work is not something that was conjured up or invented by, brilliant as the concept in the digital world is, it's basically something that exists in nature and that's just reapplied in the digital world. In nature, it's often known as the handicap principle, where animals will develop features that seem wasteful for the outside observer, but then when you really look at it, it really serves a function. For example, the peacock has, this very elaborate feather pattern. It takes a lot of energy to produce, but what it does is that not only is it able to prove that it's a strong individual animal, but it's also a feature that is extremely hard to imitate from a predator's point of view. And you see that over and over, where these features are actually security features that are present in these animal species. Proof of work, you can also see it, for example, in the behavior of bees, where the queen bee is going to fly extremely high until only one male is able to follow her, and that'll be the one that mates with her. So it's expending, you could call it wasting energy, but really it's spending energy to then convert it into something else. And usually that's security. By the way, gold, you could call gold as well a distributed ledger. So in that sense, I disagree with you that, this is the first time in the history of the world that we've seen this. I would call gold a distributed ledger it's unearthed by the expenditure of work, and the way gold is distributed in some ways is going to reflect how value is distributed. It's a ledger to keep track of transactions and value in the world. Just to add to the idea that proof of work is wasteful and Bitcoin mining is wasteful, if people talk about mining consumes as much as an entire country, I've heard a recent estimate that said as much as the state of Massachusetts. Keep in mind that miners can be installed pretty much anywhere on the planet. So what you see is that they go to, for example, the country of Georgia, they go to Iceland, they go to places like Washington State, where you have extremely cheap energy that nobody wants, and then they convert that into financial reliability. That is what they do. Another way to look at proof of work is think about if you want to preserve a secret, right? Because that's basically what you do. If you want to protect information that's in the ledger, you want to preserve a secret. It's kind of like hiding a treasure. So one of the most successful ways that people have hidden treasures in the past is to bury it very deep or to build a pyramid on top. And if you want to get hold of that treasure, the energy that you need to expend at the bottom of the pyramid, like in the middle of it, is going to be proportional to the energy that was spent to constructing it in the first place. So that's another way to look at it. And then if you think about the alternative approaches that have been suggested, proof of stake in particular and other ones, they almost always boil down to some political construct where, we try to reach consensus by some form of voting, and then you're going to penalize the people that are in charge. So I imagine if the Egyptians had come up with a political system to protect their mummies, I think the chance would be very low that we would still be able to see them in museums today. So my answer to a lot of the proof of stake proposals, my suspicion is that it's kind of the equivalent of alchemy, where in the Middle Ages, people tried to create gold. They didn't want to have to dig it out of the ground because that cost so much energy. They wanted to find a shortcut and create gold out of other elements, and never succeeded, of course. So I think that to try and bypass and try and spend a lot less energy to get the same amount of security, I think that's going to be proven a fallacy. But of course, I'd love to be proven wrong, and I'm open to see what the future is going to bring.
All right. So blockchain's been around for almost a decade now, and there's some people that are like on Erik's side saying that proof of work has been criticized, and Turr saying that you need proof of work for security. I'm kind of curious how you guys see this going forward, if there's going to be a new technology that emerges, whether there's something in the works that could potentially replace proof of work. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts. So Erik, go ahead, take it away.